concrete is the second most used material on Earth, behind only water. Our technology, CaptureCrete, actually, once it's made into a road, a bridge, or a building, absorbs CO2 from the air, and that's removing CO2. I lost some close family members when I was young due to air pollution. Recently became a new dad. It's my job to do whatever I can to make sure that she was in a world that can support her life, a full life, and a healthy life. When we first created our technology back in 2020, nobody cared about it at all. Could have given them money and they'd be like, nah, legacy industry, not that interested. Now there's customer-driven demand for lower carbon footprint materials, activities, things like that. So I think the reason we're seeing this resurgence in the market is
Thank you so much, Tim, for being here. We're going to dive straight into it. We want to ask, what are carbon credits?
That's a very loaded question. It's certainly something that a lot of people have heard about, but not many people really understand it that well. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there's two different credit markets, carbon credit markets. You have mandatory market, and then you have the voluntary carbon market. And I think what most people hear about is more the voluntary carbon market, which is where myself with Carbon Limit and our technology plays into. So effectively, the basis for carbon credit market is a carbon credit. One carbon credit equals 1 ton of CO2 emissions, either avoided or removed. So that's the basis of that. And then you go further into carbon credits, like how they're generated. Well, a tree could generate a carbon credit. You could have nature-based solutions, forestry solutions, planting trees. And you could have engineered solutions like direct air capture, which a lot of people have seen. This big giant box has a fan and has these filters inside. It's effectively pulling CO2 directly out of the air and then scrubbing the air of that CO2 and then generally injecting it down a well or creating it into different products. There's a multitude of other types of carbon credits, but effectively, when we look at carbon credits and we look at the carbon credit marketplace, it's based off of a ton of CO2 avoided or removed. And then you can buy these carbon credits as a company or even as an individual to reach your carbon goals or to offset your own carbon footprint. So there's a couple of reasons why companies and individuals do it, but effectively it's monetizing a ton of CO2 pollution that you can avoid from a typical process, like in our instance, making concrete. You make a ton of when you make a ton of cement, the glue that holds concrete together, it creates approximately 1 ton of CO2. So that'd be 1 credit. Right. And if you can avoid using some of that cement by using other materials, like these materials that we're using and our CaptureCrete technology, which are natural minerals that don't have that same carbon footprint, you can avoid some CO2, and then our technology, CaptureCrete, actually, once it's made into a road, a bridge, or a building, absorbs CO2 from the air, and that's removing CO2.
So we have a ton. Why 1 ton? If you can maybe tell us about how was this system conceived? Is there a regulatory body?
Yeah, initially for those mandatory markets, and we're not in it, you're provided permits to emit a certain amount of CO2, and they base it, the increments are ton. So it's just the easy form of measurement to say, okay, well, you've emitted X tons, you can no longer emit any more CO2 emissions, whether that means ceasing operations for the day or for the quarter, or if it means you have to buy additional permits, which allow you those additional tons. So I think it's really just based on an easy measurement, and that's generally how they based that mandatory market, and the voluntary just followed suit.
So you said there's 2 types of carbon credits, removal and avoidance. Mm-hmm. Removal, it's quite explanatory. You are able to track it. But how are you able to track avoidance? Because we did it when we were doing our research. It seemed like there's some companies out there that claim to have or said to have bad credit. They're claiming that they're basically claiming credit for something that they don't have, that they have no effect on already. So sure. Can you briefly explain what the difference between those two and how do you accurately calculate avoidance?
So that's another big can of worms, and it's where in our industry it's called MRV, measurement, reporting, and verification. And when you're doing MRV, to your point about the uncertainty of did we avoid this amount of, how do we prove that? How do we quantify that? Well, you have to determine a baseline. That baseline, let's say, again, using our analogy with making concrete, the baseline ton of cement is 1 ton of CO2. So if you could quantify, hey, when we made this next ton of cement, it was only 500 kgs, which would be a half a ton of CO2. This is avoidance of half a ton of CO2. So when we make 2 tons, we actually create 1 ton of avoidance. You have to have a baseline, and then not only have that baseline, it's got to be accepted, that baseline, but on top of that, how are you measuring, reporting, and verifying that? And it's got to be a third party, what they call a VVB, a validation verification body. All these acronyms and things are all over the place with this.
Yeah.
But you need these folks to go in there and actually check your data, check your measurement methods, and even as far down as making sure that you calibrate your equipment on a specific schedule. You calibrate your scales, you calibrate your TGA, which determines mass loss. Like it's on the surface, it seems really rudimentary simple, but it's super complex if you're doing it the right way. And that's, there's a big issue with, everyone's heard of the carbon credit market, but most of them have heard of it because of some big issue, some big blip, some big misfortune, some big black eye in the industry. And it's what we're looking to avoid with new forms of MRV, with better carbon capture technologies, companies, and there's got to be integrity in the space, because you're effectively saying, hey, I just did something that solved this invisible problem, pay me.
So how did you know which carbon credit partner to choose? Because there's a wide variety of them, right?
Oh, for carbon registries?
Yes.
So the way that, I look at it, and we looked at it, and I recommend other climate tech companies and other carbon capture entrepreneurs and inventors out there, because getting into this industry is exciting, but there's a lot to deal with. You have to find a carbon credit registry, which is a third-party organization that has methodologies that are approved, meaning you've got effectively a certain pathway, a certain category of capturing carbon, which we found a registry called Verra. Verra and Gold Standard are kind of the more well-known ones, and the veterans in the industry. You have a lot of new carbon registries as well, and including Puro Earth, which was majority owned by NASDAQ, which is a really exciting one that NASDAQ has taken this interest. But they actually have specific methodologies to say, if you're capturing carbon by creating biochar, you fit into this methodology. If you don't fit into one of their methodologies, then it's an uphill battle to get a carbon credit buyer comfortable to buy a credit that isn't approved with one of these methodologies, these effectively approved categories for capturing carbon under these third-party organizations, AKA carbon registries.
Now, if we can examine, carbon credits were created in 1997, I believe, by the United Nations, and they were relatively, casual until 2028 when it dropped. But ever since, within the last 5 years, it's been seeing a great boom. Can you tell us why are we seeing why is it so hot these days?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of conversations around, this market being very roller coaster of a market, because, you have these ups, and then you have these big interest from, in our industry, the Global Cement and Concrete Association committed to reducing 25% of carbon footprint by 2030 and going net zero by 2050. So when we first created our technology back in 2020, and we were doing customer discovery, nobody cared about it at all. Like we could have given them money and they'd be like, nah, legacy industry, not that interested, really didn't have a customer-driven demand, didn't have incentives. Now there's customer-driven demand for lower carbon footprint materials, activities, things like that, and incentives for doing such. So I think the reason we're seeing this resurgence in the market is specifically that. And there's incentives, there's a market for it, there's a customer-driven demand, and then there's these big, hairy, audacious goals for being, as we talked before this session, countries and cities and states and regions going to carbon neutrality. And to get there, you typically can't just do it by reducing carbon habits. You have to have this ability to generate carbon credits, sell carbon credits.
And so if we're thinking about this as a broader system, right, I have to ask, what do you think is the purpose of the carbon credit system, right? Because in one end, it does allow these companies to make these large scale commitments, right? And it makes news, and there's a lot of downstream effects that are positive from that too, right? You say, oh, if even a massively greenhouse gas emitting company like Shell or a large oil company, for example, were to make that decision to go carbon neutral and use carbon credits to get there, it would have a lot of downstream effects on the broader industry, broader sectors of industry, and how sustainability generally would turn into something that's more mainstream. However, at the same time, when you introduce individual investors, right, and especially when you just brought up how NASDAQ is even getting involved here, I would perhaps be a bit stressed out, actually, that these profit motives could get in the way of what I would perceive to be the ultimate goal here, which is a broader interest in sustainability. How do you balance that as a professional? And maybe you can also just let us know how you see from an industry insider perspective, where is this industry going in terms of what that core motivation is for how we got here in the first place?
Yeah, no, and I agree with a lot of those thoughts, because this industry, it's voluntary. VCM, voluntary carbon market. Like, it's not a mandatory thing. So you have companies like Microsoft is the biggest buyer of carbon removal credits. So there's two types of credits again. There's carbon removal credits where you're removing CO2 from the atmosphere from point source, from an emission stack, or from the ocean, or from soil. There's a lot of different ways. Or you're avoiding what typical day-to-day operations would have created anyways. But when you have a company like a Microsoft, they're doing it to reach their own net zero goals. But you also have companies and collaboratives like Frontier, which is McKinsey, Google, Unilever, like all these companies that have come together to fund carbon capture technologies and carbon credit companies to effectively reach scale. Like, why are they doing that? I mean, it doesn't really make financial sense that they're paying 2, 3, 4, 5 times what you would pay for a carbon credit in the mandatory market, does it? Business-wise?
No,
it doesn't. But they're doing that to effectuate scale of these technologies. So, I really look at it as a super positive thing. You have companies that are willing to come in, fund overly priced, very highly inflated priced carbon credits, because these are new technologies that if we don't create all these new technologies and adopt and scale these technologies, we're going to have inherent trouble. And effectively, this is helping them scale the pricing down. So they're buying them really expensive today so they can sell them cheaper tomorrow.
So you're seeing carbon credits as a catalyst for innovation in the space.
On the voluntary market, yeah, absolutely.
On the voluntary market.
Yeah, because it's bringing so much from, we use it as customer adoption value propositions.
Wow. Okay. We did not think of that. Something that we did think of is how, these type of carbon capture technologies that do include carbon removal credits as well, or voluntary credits as well, those could effectively be let's call it a mine, right, Leon? Like, yes. A mine.
Like a Bitcoin mine.
Sure.
A mine. You invest in one of these companies, you choose to, purchase their items, and, it's like a mine for these types of credits that could hypothetically increase in value over time. Have you seen that kind of ideology come through? Because for us, we're also interested in how cryptocurrency develops along with this space. Maybe you have some thoughts on that too. It feels like that would be, a real catalyst to like improve adoption here.
Yeah, I mean, so there's kind of, and I was just meeting with University of Miami about this before this podcast, because they wanted to talk to me about how do we look at funding for carbon credits, funding for the company, all these, what are the different funding pathways? And it's unique because in our business, we're creating carbon credits. We can sell those carbon credits as they're created, and we can do something which is called forward selling carbon credits, which is we're selling carbon credits that we anticipate generating in for different vintage years, which is like wine, but forward. So vintage year 2024, 25, 26. So we can forward sell those credits. Addition to that, you can actually get project financing from companies that will come in and say, here's $5 million, fund this carbon capture project or carbon capture activity, and then pay us with carbon credits in the future. So there's really a unique opportunity for this market for companies, and those companies are investing in carbon credits, to your point about they may be worth more later, or they're creating an aggregate price and they're just getting a bunch of different types of carbon credits from different sources that are part of this big diverse portfolio of invested carbon credits. So it's quite interesting because it's very unique. I haven't seen anything like it before, and in our industry, it's it's ripe for really companies like ours to achieve funding in different pathways.
So you would suggest that, these type of technology like yours, you would suggest that a carbon capture technologist should, in their initial business plan, perhaps get involved with carbon credits.
I mean, if they're capturing CO2, if they're reducing CO2, and it's an approved methodology that's globally or regionally accepted with carbon registries, yeah, I think it'd be leaving money on the table to not do it, and it's also minimizing potential adoption of it. Because for ours, we have an additive that you add to concrete, and it gives it the ability to actively capture and absorb and permanently store CO2. It's one method and way of capturing carbon. When you put that to like a project, we had a project, one of our first paid projects was with Google. We were really excited about that.
Oh, wow.
They get to tell a really cool story when they do it. They're like, hey, we just used this CaptureCrete concrete on this project, and it actually helped absorb this much CO2, which is as much as this many trees reduces in an entire year. We've done some math that if we were to use CaptureCrete in a 1 mile stretch of road and lanes and shoulders and things included, that it could remove as much CO2 as 250,000 trees do in an entire year. And that's like a visualization of a road that's full of trees.
Oh, wow.
So you get a really cool story out of it. There's impact. You quantifiably reducing the carbon footprint for that project. And then, there's all these different things that you have to do, but you have to be really careful. In our space, there's two things that are no-nos: double counting and double selling. You can't double count the impact of the environmental attributes to say, hey, look, we removed this many trees, and then this other company, the developer said they did the same thing. That's double counting. Also can't sell you the carbon credits and then just, hey, I'm gonna sell you the same carbon credits. You can't sell them twice. So those are the two things that we have to be really cognizant of the space. And those are, big things for these companies to take into consideration.
So are you actively trying to sell your credits?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood. Yeah. So that's a true part of your business model then.
It is. Yeah, it is. It represents a decent chunk of our revenue potential. We could be revenue positive, without it. We have revenues without it. When we first started this business, we got into a really great Techstars program, and the partner was the Heritage Group, the largest privately held company in the state of Indiana. And we actually moved to Indiana from Miami in fall, and we actually got snowed on twice before we moved back. So that was, for Miami guys and team to go over there and get snowed on, that was a big deal. But we got into this program, and our initial technology was carbon capture, but with a big box. It was a first, imagine a shipping container, because it was a shipping container, with solar panels on the top. And then we had these big intake fans where it would actually draw CO2 through, and there's these giant metal cages with this, looked like kitty litter material, which is natural minerals that absorb the CO2. And we always meant for it to be saturated with CO2 and then sold to the concrete companies so they could just put it in the roads as they were paving the roads, and it would permanently store there. It was a good idea in theory, but it was too heavily reliant on carbon credits and tax credits. So investors, as we found out during this Techstar program, had less of an interest at that time, at least, and now maybe it's changing a little bit. A long-winded way of saying carbon credits are a part of our business, but we wanted to make sure there's a tangible part of our business too that didn't lean on carbon credits, which we sell our material to cement or concrete companies, or we license it and charge them a royalty. So it's really important. I'm stressing the fact that, as a new climate tech company or a new climate entrepreneur or inventor, carbon credits are great, but if you rely on them 100%, it can be a little scary, especially for an investor that wants to come in and throw you some money, because if things change tomorrow in a voluntary carbon market, what's going to happen? And that's the concern.
So how were you able to gain the trust of these initial buy-ins of big corporations like Google? How were you able to get that? And another follow-up question is that you're mainly targeted the construction business. Typically, it's kind of ironic in a sense because you're also in the preservation business as well. So how does that two tie in for your vision?
Well, we spent a lot of time and energy doing everything we could to de-risk our technology, to prove it meets standards, to prove it meets methodologies. We got into a Techstars program. They're very challenging to get into. You get like a 1% acceptance rate generally. So it's not like, they don't just let anyone in. And once you're into some of these programs, Techstars, Y Combinator, you're kind of seen as generally vetted and pre-validated in some format.
Right.
And then from that program, we got a lot of attention from a lot of big investors, a lot of big partnerships. We created great networks there. We won a bunch of awards. We won Climate Tech Startup of the Year last year at Verge 23, which was really exciting. We won a lot of construction startup competitions with SMEX. We won Innovation Award competition at Cityscape in Riyadh. Won some other cool competitions in Dubai and Innovation World Cup in Munich. Don't want to toot my own horn, but it's really about our technology and our team. Because of our technology, because of our team, we've really gotten as much credibility as we could. We got into a Google Climate Change Accelerator, which was 11 companies, I believe they selected in all of North America to be part of this. And because of that, we built those good relationships, and we built these good networks. So, to answer that, it's really creating a great network, finding a way to create that credibility and validity, building the right team around you. I mean, there's so many different avenues. And then from the crossroads of construction and preservation, we really look at it that we saw concrete as it's the second most used material on Earth, behind only water, and that's a big deal. So we looked at it that, hey, if we're going to use all this concrete, which creates, the jury is out whether it's 6-8% of global emissions, but it's a lot. It's a big chunk of emissions. So said, hey, how can we do something that creates a lot of emissions and actually trying to turn that around? So we looked at it that way, that if we can find this opportunity to use the second most used material in the world to store CO2 and store carbon, that we're going to be doing a service every time we build buildings and pave roads and do things like that.
So if we're thinking about, this kind of conundrum here, I'd also like to consider how your business is also in the context of carbon credits, right? So let's take a step back a bit, right? So let's say somebody buys CoolCrete, right? Or let's say somebody buys CaptureCrete.
Yep.
They want to use this technology, they want to capture. They also want the access to be able to perhaps trade the carbon credits that are on it, right? Does that interact in a weird way if the carbon credits are used in a certain place that, could have been involved with building, So perhaps that construction could have been done in a certain area, but now is not going to be done. It's just interesting because, when you think of a lot of carbon capture technology, right? You don't think about carbon capture technology that involves the building sphere, right? In fact, they're probably adverse to each other in a lot of ways. However, for you here, it's being involved in building and also being involved in carbon capture. As someone who believes in abundance myself, right, and an abundance agenda as a whole, right, I think that more housing and more building is broadly better, and that the movement to get rid of things to prevent climate change is not where we should go. And so I'm very interested just in being genuinely curious of how you're able to tell your story to investors and people that are involved in the climate change world, because there's also the degrowth movement and people that are just against building, right? So how have you found a way to tell that story while being a sustainability company while also being involved in building?
Yeah, look, the numbers, and just as we're urbanizing, the amount of cement and concrete that's projected to be utilized over the next 40 years, it's pretty dramatic. There's no way it's going to slow down, as we increase populations, as people move to cities, as we need more infrastructure, as we need to restore old infrastructure. They quantified that we're going to build the equivalent of one New York City every month for the next 40 years.
We saw that.
Even if we minimize a little bit, right? We're still building, New York's you guys are in New York. You guys know New York's a pretty big city, and it's a concrete jungle. And that's a lot of concrete, but India is developing. All these countries, we can't tell them to stop developing, right? And I think that's one of the biggest pieces, is that as those countries continue to develop, they're not building stick houses. I think there's just a challenge. I think we have to accept the fact that there's certain activities that we're going to need to do. How do we get more sustainable with those activities? That's the way I look at it. I think that, our customers with Carbon Limit are generally cement and concrete producers. They, in many cases, don't care about reducing carbon. They, in many cases, don't care about carbon credits. What they do care about is business. and their competitor is offering a sustainable solution, they lose business to them. Today, it's actually the case. So if they don't have a sustainable solution, they could be losing business that they had before. They could be not gaining new business. And then the other value proposition is that if we can generate carbon credits with a concrete partner, a licensee of ours, we can do a revenue share from those carbon credits, so we can actually give them a new revenue stream. Like, these things are why carbon credits to us are important, to help prop that industry in and actually have those people buy into this. Because again, you have like a few years ago, again, like no one cared about this technology. It wasn't even a thing. And there was one or two companies that did have some solutions out there. But again, it was helping them differentiate. It was helping them get more business. It wasn't really because they truly wanted to do it. Maybe a few did, But for the most part, we're seeing this as very customer driven, very incentive driven. And now that storytelling aspect too.
So how can you explain a bit more how you got started into this business?
Yeah. So it's funny, we were talking about restaurants before this too. Before my first climate tech company, which was before Carbon Limit, I somehow got into investing in and running a restaurant. So it was you know restaurants and you know what it entails. It's crazy business, but I learned so much. But the one thing I really learned was I've always been an entrepreneur and I've always been an inventor. Again, the restaurant thing was like an anomaly. And I realized, working 14 hours a day, I don't care if I do that, if it's for something that I'm really passionate about and something that fulfills me, but it wasn't, and I realized, hey, like it was a perfect way to change my lens of being an entrepreneur from saying, all right, what can I do to make the most money and then figure out how to enjoy doing it enough so I can get through all the obstacles that are inherently going to happen to, all right, what am I really passionate about? What drives me and what will fulfill me? And for me, I'd lost some close family members when I was young due to air pollution, as a result of air pollution effectively. And recently became a new dad. The two things that I didn't want to have happen were people to lose family members prematurely to, issues outside of their control, AKA air pollution and some of the things that happen from climate change, global warming and other things, but also having a new daughter, looking at it from, okay, well, I want her to have a full life. Like, it's my job to do whatever I can to make sure that she lives in a world that can support her life, a full life and a healthy life. So going back to the restaurant piece, seeing that I really didn't, get fulfillment from that, I started to understand like what I was passionate about, what drove me, and I got into climate tech, which was then called clean tech. And, before climate tech existed, the words, created and was researching online to find out, all right, what can I do to help reduce air pollution? And I created a few different technologies, which all merged and pivoted into this additive for coatings and paint that gave paint the ability to actively absorb VOCs, which are the most commonly found air pollutants in the air, but also absorbed CO2.
What is VOC?
So it's a volatile organic compound.
Okay.
So it's like formaldehyde. Like when a new rug or a new piece of furniture or something like that, it's off-gassing formaldehyde. This is like from the glue, from like the chemicals that are in there. And this is something that, I had a sensitive respiratory system. And so did my dad and some of my other family members. These things really can bother people that have that. So find this really interesting technology, created this air purifying paint and CO2 absorbing paint, and then had the opportunity to exit and to start up Carbon Limit. Carbon Limit really saw as we were going through that process, and my background is developing these technologies. So it's creating carbon capture technologies or negative emission technologies and then commercializing them.
How did you learn how to do that initially? Was it in school or from your own curiosity?
So I started down the path in college for material science. So I've always been, scientist and inventor. But when I saw such a disconnect, and this was years ago, it wasn't last year, where there's business and science were like always seem to be like completely opposite sides of campuses. And people in the business side weren't necessarily inventors, and people on the science side weren't necessarily business folks. So they were just more so on the material science side. How can I create patents? How can I create publications? But no connection between that and building businesses. So I actually finished pre-law in business. So From then, I went on to Google Scholar, if anyone knows what that means. Do you know Google Scholar?
I know Google Scholar, the website. Is there a real program attached to it?
So if you Google Google Scholar,
Yes.
you'll find, you click on a link and it's the same home screen. It's a search box, but it says Google Scholar.
Yes.
If you search that search box, you find publications by the world's, brightest scientists, students, doctor students, and you find some really interesting stuff there. So I started tooling around and looking at, all right, what can I find these natural materials that are CO2 sorbents and inorganic materials that I could utilize for this purpose. And there was a lot of connecting of the dots. When I first started going through it, I had two computers open, one to decipher the other one when I was researching it, because not all these things added up always. And then every pattern emerged from there, and I started figuring out a lot of these technologies and then practically applying them.
So you are someone that's won, just get this straight for a second. You're someone that's won global competitions in sustainability. Yeah. Global, not just sustainability competitions for advocacy, global science sustainability competitions. Mm-hmm. Sustainability competitions that involve science. You have obviously a great degree, pre-law and business. That's wonderful. I was a business major and I went to law school, so I recognize the value of that, and I too love to dabble in science. But I do not think that I would be able to self-teach myself effectively to create this technology that's winning all of these awards so far. Where did that tenacity and drive come from? I know you mentioned your family and unfortunately things happening related to air quality.
Yeah.
However, where did it come from where you said that I'm going to take time to learn online? And I guess another question is, how did you know that you learned enough? Because people know,
sure.
that you're able to learn things, right? And you're putting the dots in your head, but there's a different decision that says that 0 to 1 moment, right? Mm-hmm. When you're like, okay, I am going to take this idea. I'm going to take these hours and hours I've spent on something.
Definitely.
And I'm going to apply it to a real concept, right? How did you know what time that was supposed to be?
Yeah. So I say, a lot of people say it's 10,000 hours. It's actually not. It's 10,000 iterations. Spending 10,000 hours and 10,000 iterations, that's mastery. To answer your question, my family background is half of my family are educators in the college level and professors. The other half are inventors and entrepreneurs. Oh, wow. And to kind of put some basis out there too, if you research some of the most profound inventors and inventors of our time and everything else, you're going to find that a majority of them were self-taught. And I think a big reason why is that you're taught limitations in university, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. So my whole thing was I didn't know what I could do, and I didn't know what I couldn't do, so I just did whatever I wanted.
Do you think universities would have caught you up in groupthink?
I think so. I really do. Again, I was going through half of my college path was material science and the related courses. I wasn't excited about it, so I just felt that it wasn't the right path. And look, there's great universities out there that you can go to where that may not be the case. There's other universities where you have a professor that would never have commercialized something. You go to MIT and the professor has a bunch of awards, they've gotten a bunch of companies, they've got great technology. But unless you have a professor like that, most of the professors are textbook professors. So in many cases, I think that could hamper you and could limit you from what you can actually do. So I just think, I don't know what I can't do, so I'll just do anything.
And to follow up on that, how did you know that your product was sufficient enough for practical use? Because we're talking about I'm not sure, are you guys doing buildings, roads, or not? Because I'm wondering the structural integrity of if you're building a building, is this new mix gonna, affect it at all?
Yeah. Lives are at stake.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, lives are at stake.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, and look, you could do, at least half of the projects out there are a sidewalk or a roadway that's not going to fall on someone, right? I mean, a bridge is in a roadway. It's a part of a roadway, but it's not, what we're doing. So there's enough projects as we quantify durability. We've met ASTM standards on our technology. We've gone through the gamut on durability, and we can only get so much as we're allowed on calendar days. We're continuing to always get different tests done and different durability results back. To answer the question on how we know it's good, so I have a team of material scientists and civil engineers. So they're all, PhDs. They went through the whole process too. They didn't have the same, everyone's got a different specialty and a different way of thinking, and mine's just a little different than theirs. But I've backed it up with all of that internal, external testing. We've gotten 2 grants from the Department of Defense and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers because we have a very novel, sustainable, dual-use technology. Dual use meaning for military and for public application. And going through that process and just getting all of those quantifications, we know. And the materials that we're using are materials that aren't necessarily not used. Maybe one material is very much less used than others, but the combination of the materials and the way that we do it allows for this property to occur and for this carbon capture to exist. So some of these materials that we're working with are used regionally as aggregates already for concrete or something else, but they're not used the same way or in the same format that we're using them.
And you said you worked with Google. Was that the beta test with them, or did you have one? What was like the first iteration of CaptureCrete?
So, we were really lucky. Again, going through a lot of these programs, like we got a lot of really great connections and networks and being part of these, well-regarded programs. We got invited to do a Department of Transportation project. So our first project was actually with the Department of Transportation. Of course, we made concrete before then and we deployed it and we did more lab scale than anything. But then we dove right in like head first and actually did a section of in-service expressway, I-94 westbound. So you can actually drive over it.
Oh, wow.
And it captures the CO2 from your car as you're driving over it. But it's a 3-year study done with multiple companies like ours to quantify what sustainable solutions are actually going to be good for the DOT to accept and to apply and to adopt. So we actually, before that smaller scale project with Google compared to doing a little section of roadway, we did a DOT project. So that one was great. We got to actually ride over there, and we didn't get to drive on it because they closed down the section for us to go over, and we actually walked on it. And so we were breathing to help
There you go.
CO2 into the road. So we did something, but it was really cool because we actually. The really great thing about kind of wrapping back to the beginning of this conversation, how do we quantify the carbons captured? So what we were able to do with this roadway made with our technology was actually drill cores, like these giant core samples of concrete, like a big cylinder. And we cored them from the road, after 6 months, 9 months, 12, and I think 15 months. We core sampled this concrete. And then we would go to the control baseline site, the DOT's site without our technology, core those samples too, test them and compare how much CO2 is captured in ours versus theirs. And whatever the delta was, that's how much CO2 we captured. So we quantified it on multiple occasions, how much more CO2 is captured into ours versus theirs. That's how you can quantify to the public and for carbon credit purposes what that carbon removal efficacy was and results were.
I think they use the same method in carbon dating when they drill into the ice and they see the carbon of different ages. But I have a question. Is there a limit to how much you could capture?
There is.
There is?
There is.
Okay.
Yeah. So the carbon limit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's like a sponge. So so it's driven by the amount of material, our CaptureCrete that's put in there, and it's cool. It's also driven by the amount of cement that's in that concrete. So if you were to say, okay, the amount of CaptureCrete material plus cement equals the size of the sponge, once you reach that saturation point, it's just going to service like a normal, normal piece of concrete would. And what we found, to the point of durability and if it would hold up and how we knew it was good, it actually increases compressive strength. So actually, because when the CO2 is pulled in from the air and then mineralizes into solid minerals in the concrete, it creates stronger concrete. So it actually improves that concrete, fills in some of those voids and micro cracks and pores, so it can help even mitigate some of that degradation.
So you're saying less potholes if you use concrete?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say yes. But I think most potholes are more in asphalt roads than concrete roads. But certainly when you're on a concrete road, if you start breaking apart, you're going to have some really nasty potholes there too. So you want to be really careful because once that concrete starts breaking apart, it starts degrading. You get chemical intrusion there, and then it just really starts eating away at the concrete.
Is the increased strength why there's a potential military application here?
So the military application was more on how can they create lower carbon footprint concrete. It was more broad and ambiguous, but the increased strength goes a long way to maybe gain additional MILCON deployment, military construction deployment. That piece is important because if you have really strong concrete and you can put tanks and things over it and you don't have to replace it during the lifespan of a base, like that's a big deal. You don't want to have to do it twice when you can do it once. So I think I think it adds value, and this was like this was an unknown. This was just a value, like an extra value that we didn't even know existed. We're like, hey, we just want to capture as much CO2 and make sure it works like regular concrete, but in fact, it can work better.
So last week, Y Combinator released their annual Request for Startups document. I believe that's what it's called. And it includes 10 types of sectors that they would recommend startups get into. Mm-hmm. And they use that list to inform their annual cohorts. They have, the fall cohort, the winter cohort, and the spring cohort. This is the first year, I believe, that they had 3 cohorts. A lot of people are saying YC is getting too big. That's off topic. We'll talk about that at a different time. Regardless, though, the number one on that list was startups that are selling into the government. And so, I think that there is genuinely some belief right now that there is going to be, broader adaptation of new technologies in the government moving forward. I would like to ask, based off of your, experience, you have the MILCON, you have DOD, you have the Army Corps of Engineers, and you have DOT, Department of Transportation.
And
would you
DOE.
recommend? And DOE. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've been on both the civil and the military side. Perhaps broadly, would you recommend that early stage founders try to get involved with selling into governments or being a part of the government grants ecosystem? And more generally, how would you have them decide whether they should try to be a part of the military side or the civil side?
So yes to all the above. Like I really think, and this was our path early on, and we got, not to say we got lucky, we actually won an X-Tech competition with the Army, which led into our first grant. Winning that small competition, I think it was like 10,000 or something we got for it. It was, for a brand new startup, it was great. But winning those competitions, there's a lot of those competitions that you can get into where you have your idea, you have your team, and if they like it, they'll give you a prize, they'll give you an award, you get to kind of connect, and then they'll ask you to put in application for a CBIR grant, an SBIR grant, which is usually DOD, DOE, or even NSF. Those grants, I think, are so critical because they prove credibility. Additionally, I was just at Verge, and the DOE had a huge presence there. Now, Verge is it's one of the largest sustainability conferences, so it's all things sustainable. Materials, energy, so many things. So the DOE was there. They have 3 programs now. One is a voucher program, and this is really unique. So this gives startups the ability to have even something on like a paper napkin to say, hey, look, we have this great idea, and this is what the idea entails. The DOE has partnered up with a third party that allows company to get money right away. And this is a small amount of money, and they do it on performance, and it's a voucher program. They also have the ability to test with national labs, do things like that. There's an Energy Works program too, which gives you a little larger on the grant sizes, and then you have loan office stuff. So I think there's a lot of really interesting ways for startups to get money today, but getting those grants can lead to, you get a phase 1, which is could be 250,000, could be a little more or less. Phase 2, it could be almost $2 million, more or less. And then a phase 3 isn't really a grant, but it's the opportunity for those startups to actually do business with them, whether it's contracts or other. So phase 3 is it's a non-descriptive next step with them. So once you get into their ecosystem, they have a much easier time doing business with you. I think Y Combinator is certainly onto something because there's a huge opportunity right now for especially climate tech companies, even on using AI or using software and different algorithms to quantify methane release and all these other things that could be done with it, or MRV again to the beginning to quantify carbon uptake and carbon capture. There's just a big opportunity for these companies to come in, get some needed funding, non-dilutive funding because they don't take equity, and then potentially get those, whether they're vendor agreements or other projects with them.
So something that was said on the first season of our podcast by Dr. Dan Gartenberg, who is one of the nation's leading sleep scientists. He had a TED Talk that had over 5 million views, and he's raised a bunch of money through government grants for his work with sleep science. He said that what people don't realize is that the largest venture capitalist in the United States is actually the U.S. government. Yeah. And he said that really succinctly in one sentence, and that's something that I haven't forgot. As someone who has some government work experience myself, and also has an interest in this entrepreneurship and venture capital world, as you see through this podcast, that's something that's actually very encouraging for me, honestly, to see, and hopefully that continues as well. And hearing your positive experiences with that is also very encouraging. And would hope that the people listening, if they are interested in starting something that does have a scientific impact that could be applied to the government, they would take that path as well, and that the government would continue to support them. I think that would be really important and prudent.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that too. Look, there's an opportunity for even kids in college to get these grants. Like, these grants aren't just reserved for people that are in the professional world with corporations. There's NSF grants, which are meant for universities, for students. There's grants that you can get as a student if you can form your own company. Like, look, you can start tomorrow. You can get it done immediately. Like, the whole idea is that we're helping accelerate these critical technologies, as we call them, that are helping with sustainability, helping with carbon capture, helping with measurements, and helping with everything else that we need to help create a more sustainable environment. Because if we don't have a sustainable environment, we don't have much else, right?
Maybe we should have looked at that during Sea Straws.
Yeah, the first business we worked on was a sustainable products company seeking to eradicate single-use plastics in the hospitality industry.
Yeah.
And we definitely found it in with universities, and we're able to get into a bunch of university dining systems, sold millions of straws, which is a crazy thing to think about. I think about that a lot, actually, how quantity of impact and sustainability, you can define impact in so many different ways, right? So you were saying, you stepped over the concrete and, you're the capture-crete, and, you're able to, have your own voice be, providing the CO2, but, you could also measure the amount of cars, right, that would go over it. Yeah. For us, we were measuring the amount of plastic we replaced in terms of, our product versus what would have been a plastic product. But something that I also like to measure was the amount of hands that touched the product. And I think for your business as well, we think about pitching strategies and everything. There's the concept of, how can you showcase impact and showcase it in a way that's like very digestible to the average person? Yeah, cars release this amount of CO2. Yeah. This amount of cars went over our concrete. We saved this much CO2 immediately. Yeah, it's easy to quantify that way. I love that. I love that for you.
And you said you worked with governments. Governments, they have large wallets. I'm wondering the price factor for potentially, are you guys only doing large scale projects, or do you also offer an opportunity for smaller scale commercial use as well?
Again, all of the above there. What we're focused on mainly is working with larger cement and concrete producers, so that, it's challenging. Even in our Google project, we kind of did it backwards, where Google wanted it, and then we had to connect with their batching plant that batches the concrete, and their contractor. They had to agree. It had to come together. They had to put it in there. Truth is, I think they poured it twice without our technology in it. And then they ripped it back up and did it again when they put our, so right. It was, we kind of went the wrong direction on it. And then, what we see is kind of the better, more, less, least path of resistance is getting it into the cement and concrete producers. So that way, if you go to Home Depot, buy a bag of concrete, or if a project's getting poured, it's already in there. So that's really the better pathway for us. As we launch new products like CoolCrete, which my shirt shows, this one is more product-based. So this one is less on the ready mix, which is that when you see a concrete truck pouring concrete, that's ready mix concrete. Right. Versus what we're doing with CoolCrete, and our first partners here, which is making like rooftop pavers and rooftop tiles. So actually making precast products. Those products can be bought on the shelf from Home Depot, from Menards, from other places. And then it's easier to also increase a cost to say, okay, well, this is more sustainable. And CoolCrete is really unique because we have a big problem in the States, which is called the urban heat island effect. Yeah. And that's globally. Right. And it's more in bigger cities. What happens is when it's a hot sunny day and the sun is coming down and UV is coming down, when it hits, when it doesn't hit trees, when it doesn't hit grass, when it doesn't hit other organic materials, and it's hitting man-made materials, those man-made materials like concrete, like asphalt, are absorbing the heat and then radiating the heat, and it's creating an heat island effect, urban heat island effect. What happens is that could be 10, 20 degrees hotter than the ambient temperature. So you go outside and it's 95 degrees. What if it's 20 degrees hotter? You're at a really dangerous level of heat that causes a lot of heat-related deaths and illnesses. For example, in Europe, in their 2022 heat wave, about 70,000 people were killed. 2023, 48,000 people were killed, and they think the number is going to continue to rise because they're going to continue to quantify, more potential deaths, and we're still calculating for 24. But what most people don't know is that extreme heat is the #1 weather-related killer, period, in the world, and it is. If you think about those numbers alone, like extreme heat is causing problems not only for our health, but also it's a huge strain on the grid. As it's hotter and hotter, we have to get more and more electricity, which creates more and more carbon footprint, which exacerbates the whole cycle.
Because you've got to cool down all the machinery and whatnot.
And your building too, like if you guys are ever in your building in the middle of a hot sunny day, like your air conditioner kicks on more frequently, right? Because it's heating up the inside of your building. So we've made a really cool technology with CoolCrete, no pun intended, that has these natural materials that are reflective, so it reflects back. So think of like a big concrete tile or a rooftop paver. It's reflecting back sun and UV, which is reflecting heat, but it also has thermal emittance and thermal conductivity properties, which don't allow for the heat to transfer through it like it would in a traditional concrete tile paver or asphalt shingle rooftop, which goes into the house, which heats up the house, and which turns on your air conditioning more, increasing your bill and increasing more emissions into the air as we're increasing energy use. So that is circular, continuing to increase and increase.
So you're envisioning just on roof tiles to reflect, or are there any other use cases potentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that has, site work, flat work, anything that has exposure to the sun, if it's in and around a house, the building envelope down in South Florida, we use stucco on everything, so you put it in the stucco.
Yeah.
Also, roadways, sidewalks, anything that would create heat, that would heat surrounding buildings, this would be a huge savers, and also makes it more comfortable for people to live and to be outside. So, I'd say anything that has any exposure to the sun.
Similar to how CaptureCrete has like a limit in terms of how much carbon it captures, does CoolCrete have like a limit to its use?
No, that's the big difference. So that's where we really stand apart. So some people that are listening may have heard about cool coatings or may even experience cool coatings, and you put it on a rooftop and it helps create reflectivity, and it helps bounce back some of that heat, and it does help cool. The problem with those is, one, they're expensive. Two, you have to pay to apply them on top of something else. And then three, after the first few years, and up to 5 years, it can degrade the efficacy up to 50%. You could have to pull it back off and put a new coat on. So it's degradable. So even if it's working really great year one and you're reducing your electricity bill 5, 10, 20%, by year 5, maybe you're not. Maybe it's just a few percent you're reducing, and maybe it's already burnt off, and maybe it's already worn off. This is in concrete, so it's going to last as long as that concrete lasts. It's a non-degradable, zero electric cooling technology.
So let's get to something that is my Roman Empire, which is the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
It's the concept. People always talk about Roman concrete.
Yep.
And I'm hearing today, two exceptional new examples of improvements to the concrete space. It's a massive topic right now on Twitter, X, those pages that speak a lot about, the Roman Empire. They talk a lot actually about the strength of the concrete. And, Pliny the Elder has a very important quote about the concrete and the Roman wall. I forget what it is, but, there's something there. Maybe we can put it on the screen. So were you at all inspired by seeking to create a better concrete or a stronger concrete, and then that led to you to these, evolutions, especially with CoolCrete, right? Mm-hmm. Because you had the carbon capture technology, and that relates back to your story of improving air quality, right? But CoolCrete, it seems like there's another element there that just basically levels up the game in concrete generally, and so it's obviously very important. I want to see a society that continues to build and build sustainably, right? So for me, this is a really cool technology. Are you aware of, the way that Roman concrete is made, and, how does that relate to your kind of inspiration in building your company and your products?
Yeah, no, it's funny enough because it was the other way around, where we were like, all right, how can we create this sustainable thing? And it ended up being something that was, not to say similar to, but in the same lane as Roman concrete, because Roman concrete's great. Obviously, I've been in Rome and I've been in Italy, and I love visiting there. That concrete lasted 2,000 plus years, right? And on top of that, it's got self-healing properties. So that self-healing property piece is actually the CO2 that's captured from the atmosphere that's turning into solid minerals and working as kind of glue in there. Ours has a similar type of effect where it does have some self-healing properties as it's capturing more CO2 and mineralizing that CO2, permanently storing into the concrete. And just to give you a heads up, if you use CaptureCrete concrete and you were to demo the road or demo a building and grind that same concrete down to a fine powder, the CO2 wouldn't release. It would still be in a powder form, a solid form. So it's permanently stored. With CoolCrete, what I see is kind of got a similar attribute is that the things that degrade concrete, and our concrete today doesn't last 2,000 years, let's face it. It's not as good. It's really not. The thing that degrades it is heat, sun, UV, and then water and wear. And if it's a road, it's also the friction from tires and from vibrations, everything like that. So when you have CoolCrete, which is minimizing the amount of heat that's absorbed and increasing the efficiency of the heat being released, which doesn't create the heat island effect, you're actually minimizing that strain on that concrete, minimizing the potential wear and tear. So theoretically making it last longer and keeping it stronger. So giving it that same appeal to say, okay, well, this slab of concrete could last with CoolCrete 20, 30, 40, 50% longer. We're still quantifying that because we just recently came out of stealth mode on it because we had so much interest in the technology that we didn't want to say no. And we felt it was ready for at least the applications that are going out the door now, which are on your concrete pavers and rooftop tiles, which again aren't life safety risk because something on top of the roof, it's going to maintain its integrity, and we found that it performs really well. But really it's inspirational to see something that's 2,000 years old sustain and also surpass everything that we're doing today. So I think we can take a lot of examples. And to ride onto that, in the climate tech world, when you look at carbon capture, a lot of the methods and a lot of types of carbon capture that we're doing are mimicking nature's ability and nature's ways of capturing and the carbon cycle that we're seeing, and we're accelerating that carbon cycle to make those technologies work.
So have you had any use cases yet for CoolCrete yet?
So the first, I was just actually in Greenbuild last week in Philadelphia, and Greenbuild is about sustainable building, green buildings, right in the title.
Yes, Greenbuild.
The Greenbuild. And it was really great to see because you saw there's so much innovation, there's so much sustainability, there's these legacy companies that you've never seen be green before that are now with these great sustainable solutions, some of them adopting third-party solutions like a carbon limit offers and licenses to other companies. Two of those companies that were there are actually one of our partners for this technology to create rooftop pavers or pavers that you can put around your yard. And then now we're looking at rooftop tiles as well. And this is maybe more relevant in certain regions where you have these barrel top pavers, concrete pavers, and these can go on commercial buildings and others, but those are our first kind of rollouts with this technology.
So if we're thinking about the future of CoolCrete, right, is this something that is going to be able to be applied by, purchased by construction conglomerates, or is it something that's going to be, kind of utilized by governments or larger scale players that'll then be kind of distributed into the private sector?
We're hoping more like the DOT will spec this into projects, and then the concrete companies, which would be their vendors, would have to adopt this and integrate it into their workflow and actually push it out that way. We're looking at another avenue for it as well. And, again, we just came out of stealth mode and our first kind of avenue. But what avenue I envision and see is that we have the ability to create a concrete overlay, which is like a thin concrete layer that you can put on existing concrete. So we're not just talking about new concrete anymore, like a new concrete building or a road. You could put it on something existing. Sidewalk, you could put it on the side of a building, you could put it on top of an existing rooftop paver or tile, or you could put it on top of a road if it adheres properly. So that would be something we could sell to, other distributors, we could sell to big developers, we could sell it to really anyone. We really kind of look at ourselves as a technology company and try to steer clear of being a materials company, because there's material companies out there that do it really well, and they have a great sense of sourcing materials, supply chain, logistics, and everything in between. We want to just be great at making the technology and partner with those companies or be acquired by one of those companies. That's the way we see that.
So what is it like being in the construction industry? Because the construction industry, or at least interacting with folks in the construction industry, it interacts with local government. It interacts with, at times, real estate special interest groups. It interacts with developers. I guess like something that I would want to consider here is just what that equation looks like for you, because you have to be focused on one end, right, in creating a technology that is going to uphold the test of time, both scientifically and also creating a company that is going to be, to support your grant givers, right, like the government, and also support your investors. However, this kind of construction industry at times, I feel like it could be something that is maybe all-encompassing and maybe very relationship-based. There's also unions involved, and all of these. I'm not trying to insinuate that these players have, negative could have a negative effect if they're all brought together. I'm just trying to showcase that there's a lot going on in this, right? So maybe if you have any, war stories of being in the construction space, that would be helpful, because for me, it feels like it would be very overwhelming to create the technology that you're creating in addition to selling into this very complicated industry.
Yeah, you're right. There's a complexity because everything is risk and liability related. So once you give them this, let's say a developer deploys it, or the cement or concrete company that you partner with sells it, they have risk and liability that's tied to it, right? If they make it and it falls apart, where does the buck stop? Yeah. So that's why before these big commitments by the Global Cement and Concrete Association, the GCCA, as well as other national and other company goals for sustainability have come into play, there was almost no interest, because it's effectively like saying, hey, you're doing a great job at your business right now, you're making a lot of money. Do you want to use this brand new widget that's untested, unproven, and could potentially give you a big liability? It's like, no. Right? No. Yeah. So that was the challenge. But again, the incentives, customer-driven demand, and the big commitments all came into play. So now it's, all right, how do we de-risk it enough? And then finding a way to partner with, finding a way to work with these other companies within the industry to deploy different use cases. Like, all right, we need a road, we need a building, we need, a bridge done, we need, site work for this, we need, a stand-up, tilt-up wall. Like, we need to be in all these different types of use cases so we can continue to spread out our adoption. And that's been really the biggest piece. It's like, all right, how do I work with some of these companies? Even the big tech companies. You have Microsoft, Amazon, AWS, Google. Everyone's building data centers like crazy, right?
Right.
And the biggest chunk of carbon footprint on these data centers at that point, outside of electricity later on, is the cement. It's the concrete. That's the biggest piece that they can work on minimizing. So even though they have to build way more data centers than initially planned because of AI, they're able to do something. So working with those companies, get it into their tilt-up walls, get it into those pavers, get it into site work, get it into things so it can be easily adopted, and that will really accelerate adoption for us.
I guess, moving on from, this is related. So the data centers piece. Data centers are actually like a bit controversial in a lot of places, like especially in like suburban New Jersey, where I'm from, because they add noise, trucks, pollution to the neighborhood. I guess in that context, have you dealt with understanding, have you sold into a data center before?
So right now we're doing some testing with some companies we're under NDA with.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Centers. And that specifically, again, to prove that use case. So once we can prove the use case, then it's just a duplicatable process. So the idea would be we would gain that use case, and then we would find the big cement and concrete companies supplying them, and then we would Trojan horse that, so to speak, where we're actually getting them to adopt our technology, and then it gets into the data centers.
Right. So if we're thinking about, that's like the suburbs, right? It's a suburban issue. We've talked about the urban heat island effect too. I guess if we're going to move this conversation into a conversation about the future of cities, right? Would you see, CaptureCrete or CoolCrete as being something that you think is going to, revolutionize not just American cities, but global cities? And if so, how could you find your way into foreign markets?
I think the big word that we're going to hear more and more is adaptation. Adaptation is necessary because, we can't just turn a blind eye to the fact that we have problems with the environment and with climate, and there's extreme weather events, there's other issues that are happening, extreme heat. It's this this year we've broken more records than in a long time, and I mean ever. Like we've experienced the 2 hottest days in recorded human history, both in July. We've exceeded 18 months of 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. That wasn't supposed to happen for a long time, and it's already happened. We're in uncharted territory right now, where adaptation is going to be necessary to be able to deal with these extreme weather events, extreme heat, urban heat island effects, and other things that we've not dealt with before. Like we're not built for sustaining ourselves in like 150 degree weather. If we're really hot, and then there's urban heat island effect, and there's other things like that. So I think for us, these solutions are global because they share the same issues that we're sharing here, and even more so in other places. We've been to Middle East a lot because they're looking for zero desal. They're looking for sustainable concrete. They're looking for carbon capture. They're looking for mitigating urban heat island effect. And their solutions are kind of, rudimentary, like putting big shades. Like, that's okay. It helps a little bit, but if you can find something and that's our thing. It's like, how do we make whatever we're using today more sustainable? And that's why we thought of concrete. We don't want to change people's habits. We want to just make their product more sustainable. If you're already using concrete, you don't have to build a brand new widget that's doing X, Y, and Z, and that has a risk, and that's hard to deploy, and that costs a ton of money. We're integrated into current facilities, current production with the current product that we're already going to use. So it's like, I think it's an easy for us to get into, going into something that's already being utilized commercially.
And so if you think about the future of cities, right, there's obviously massive projects like Neom, for example, like that thing is going to be crazy. I know that there's a lot of issues with it right now. It's super behind. I believe like the leader of that project actually had to step down recently. So we'll see where that one goes. But broadly, you've done a lot of work in the Middle East, right?
Yeah.
And so what is it like to work in the Middle East? Also just generally, right? Like, coming from the US, being brought there, showcasing this incredible technology. What is that like as a founder, right? Like it must be like somewhat fun and cool a little bit, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, and look, I think like we probably have a skewed perception of it because we're actually coming and bringing a solution. Like we're not coming and like, selling, something that they don't need or doing something that's going to, harm them effectively. We're coming, bringing a solution that they're needing and looking for. And at least in Dubai, they accept, the ASTM standards, our same standards that we have. So it's easy for them to kind of adopt it, but they're specifically looking for these solutions that we have. And they're very open to it. And, I think a lot of people have different perceptions of what the Middle East is and how the people are and how, the environment is there and how things are. Like, it's really hot. There's no question. Like, it's a desert. Like,
could use CoolCrete.
They could use CoolCrete for sure. But it's really hot. And the people there are amazing. Like, we were so really pleased with just how welcoming they were. Like, how great it was to be able to interact with them, like their delegates and their folks that are directors of like their housing and their sustainability and their urban development and other things there were all part of these big conferences that we were at. And we had such good interactions, and they're so willing to look at adoption. They may even be more willing than we are to like pull the trigger and to test it and try it versus take a long time to get there. So for us, we had a really good experience there, and I think that there's a lot that we're able to do there, and there's a lot needed because when we were at Cityscape, which is in Saudi Arabia in Riyadh, and it was in October, November last year, and it wasn't as hot as it can be. It was still 115 plus or minus. Like you would go outside and it was like an oven. You felt like you were in an oven. And I know, Arizona's pretty oveny and hot over there too, but like coming from South Florida where you have a tropical, very, humid environment, going there like 115 degrees and dry, like you just like, you dry out within minutes. Like I'm walking outside and I turned around to walk back inside. I was like, this is really hot.
Yeah.
So I think those solutions, they're not only, necessary there, but they're well received.
So I'm curious, how were you able to get in contact with the Dubai people in Dubai and Abu Dhabi? And do you plan on continuing courting foreign clients in the future?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think, our main thing was how do we make a duplicatable process here in the States? Getting that duplicatable process could be, finding all the bugs and working out the kinks and then taking it overseas to make sure that we're also very seamless there. if you want to do business in the Middle East, you have to go there. It's recommended you'd have someone stationed there and have boots on the ground, or have someone on your team that's there, because you need to meet them face to face. If you don't, I think it's just an uphill battle to try to get something done, and maybe you'll spend a lot of time talking and being on Zoom calls. But we see it as a really exciting market for us, and great partnerships because of the giga projects that they have going on. Those are really exciting for us because we can help, have a mutually beneficial relationship where we're creating positive impact, telling a great story, but the environment's winning, and so the people are too.
So are you working with them on primarily providing your technologies to new construction, or addressing existing constructions?
So until we had CoolCrete, come out about a month and a half ago out of R&D and out of stealth mode, it was more or less for new construction projects. Now that we have CoolCrete, we have the ability to also touch on existing projects, which is why I'm really excited about that and that opportunity. So now we're kind of spreading our wings and looking at both categories there. I think, we already have, and in New York and New Jersey, they have laws now on minimizing the operational carbon footprint of buildings. Using something like CoolCrete can help achieve those goals, I think, on an existing building. You're not going to knock a building down and build a new building to get it more efficient. You have to do whatever you can to get there. So I think these are good solutions for existing buildings to, again, just make them more sustainable.
Speaking about solutions, we have a segment here where we play this or that.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. We're asking you one or the other, and you choose whether it's more practical to implement or it's a more sustainable option, more realistic option from your perspective.
Okay.
So the first option is skyscrapers versus low-rise. So, for example, New York City or Amsterdam. Which one is probably more practical in terms of implementation?
I would go low-rise buildings.
Oh, okay. Is there a reasoning behind that?
I think we're able to control a little bit more. If I'm thinking about my technology, our technology, we're able to maybe control it a little bit better. We're able to minimize some more of that heat island effect. Ultimately, I'd love it to go onto a high-rise too. But as we kind of got into initially, these new technologies, you need to also have some type of lineage on, all right, how successful have they been? How's that durability? So the low-hanging fruit would be the low-rise. Okay. So I think that's more or less my answer for that one. And I've been in the Burj Khalifa, which was really cool.
Oh, wow.
In Dubai. And it was really interesting because they pumped concrete all the way up.
Oh, wow.
And they pumped it, I think, up to the 145th floor. And then there was they couldn't pump any further. I think the pumps broke, and they had to put a big metal spire on the top of it that completed the building because they couldn't pump any more concrete. No one's ever pumped concrete up 145 stories.
No, absolutely not.
Right? So It's a little bit different. So again, that kind of leans into that too.
Were you in the top floor there?
We went to the top viewing deck.
Cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
which wasn't the top floor, but it was pretty close, and it was crazy.
Awesome.
I did it twice because we were flown out there twice. Once at sunset, which was crazy to see, which was really cool. And then we were above the clouds. And then once was during the day, and you could just see, World Island. You could see Palm Island and the second Palm Island. See how much really cool stuff. And their buildings there. That city is crazy.
Well, we have to go.
We got to get there.
That's where we're going.
Chorus Collective season. At some point.
There you go. Yeah.
Dense urban cores or urban expansion? Dense urban cores is Tokyo. Suburban expansion is Los Angeles.
Dense urban core, I think, because that's where I think we can create the biggest impact from, minimization of heat, but also from maximization of carbon capture and the timeline for it. So I think into that would be, my main thing and our main thing is how can we create the biggest impact as quickly as possible? So that'd meet that one.
The next is eco-friendly green roofs or solar panel facades. Singapore versus Dubai.
Yeah. I'm all for green.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm all for the green. I love nature, and whenever you can, go for it. And wherever you have to have man-made and concrete or solar panels on top of it, if that's the only choice, then that's
3D printed buildings or modular buildings.
both. Because
okay.
Yeah, right now we're working with a 3D printer that actually makes modular pieces, 3D printed modular pieces that can be transferred to the job site. So both on that.
Interesting.
Does that 3D printer happen to be Justin from Frontera.
Yeah.
We will be interviewing him in 2 days.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, we just did another follow-up to our first test run together the other day. So,
Cool.
yeah.
We're actually going to his factory, so
Nice,
we're going to
yeah.
see it in person. Will we see CoolCrete? Will we see the
You see CaptureCrete. No
Okay,
CoolCrete
we'll see
there, yeah.
CaptureCrete
But
in
we're
person.
talking
All right.
about how to implement CoolCrete there. Yeah, but we just did a little project. So unless they shipped them out already, you'll see it there.
Awesome,
yeah.
awesome. We love connections between the people on our seasons.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They're great guys. Really fun, good guys doing really cool stuff and picking out a great niche, which bridges the gap.
Cool.
Traditional brickwork like Rome or ultra modern concrete like Shanghai?
I gotta go ultra modern, just because that's the way our technology goes. I think it could be both, but I'm leaning towards the ultra modern.
Prefabricated construction like Stockholm or on-site custom builds like Mexico City?
I'll go prefab on that one.
Okay. Carbon neutral initiatives like Vancouver or net zero goals like London?
Oof. I'm leaning net zero goals.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on what you see as the difference between net zero and carbon neutral? Because, Leon and I think we're actually pretty well versed in this space before our preparation for this video, but we were not really as aware of the differences between those two terms.
From my understanding, there's not a huge difference between those terms. I think it's just how you get there.
Right.
I think the steps that you take and the decisions you make going forward. I don't claim to be an expert with those, but I feel the net zero piece brings in more stakeholders, at least from my perspective. That would be a benefit to us, to adopting our technology, to utilizing the technology, and making kind of more equal participation. So that's my take on it.
Next is restoring historical structures like Paris or building new landmarks like Hong Kong.
I mean, I got to go new landmarks with carbon.
Yeah. More
I
opportunities.
personally, outside of the professional side and the business side, I'd go for restoring, personally. But to get my technology out there, because we know it's going to happen anyways. So.
And finally, coastal city resilience projects like Miami or inland urban growth like Berlin.
Nah, definitely coastal.
Coastal.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. Coastal is super important as we have sea level rise. On top of that, integrating this into seawalls, integrating this into artificial reefs and other things like that are going to be really important. So I feel like we need to do something there to protect inland also. So for me, I'm really bullish on that. And again, we're here in Miami right now too. Right. So, and we were part of that Climate Ready Tech Hub, which was a technology hub under the Biden administration that was announced just last year. And it's been a great opportunity to build this fantastic community, this climate tech community and these climate tech companies and bring together industry, government, and private companies to all kind of work together. So for me, had such a great experience with that here.
To follow up on that, I'm curious, how does CaptureCrete and CoolCrete interact with seawater? It's interesting.
We're working on that one. So we've been working with another 3D printing company, a great 3D printing company, OnePrint. And OnePrint has done the sea cages, which was a project with, and University of Miami has done these sea cages, and they were one of the companies helping create these sea cages. These sea cages are meant for wave mitigation, so they can help keep and protect shoreline and hopefully maintain some of the shorelines, but then can also act as artificial reefs. So we looked and we've worked with them to deploy these. So what we're doing is getting data to say, okay, in the ocean, by the way, and most people don't know this, you have about 150 times the amount of dissolved CO2 by volume than you do in the air. So when you're looking at like hitting the source, if you're not hitting a smokestack that's burping out CO2, you go into the ocean, there's a lot of dissolved CO2 there. Yeah. So we're hoping that we can quantify more uptake or better uptake than the baseline in our technology mixed into products like like the sea cages with OnePrint and with So we're getting data on that, and we're also looking to work with other companies that are doing seawalls and printed seawalls to see how we can help either increase that growth of marine life and also capture more CO2 than the regular baseline would.
So if you were to be in charge of a city like Miami, a coastal city, right? Where would you start in terms of trying to mitigate these climate issues, right? Because I'm hearing a perspective that involves a lot of building, a lot of sustainable building, perhaps a regeneration, let's call it, of urban architecture through your technologies. That's one thing, but in terms of protection from the seawall itself, from rising sea levels itself, where would you start with that?
With helping to protect against rising sea levels, or working to enhance the adoption? What
Sea levels specifically, right?
Okay.
Because if unfortunately, if we've already gotten to the point where we're at that 1.5 degrees Celsius mark, like you mentioned before, it's tough, right? To think about rising sea levels specifically. I mean, I think this or that was interesting, right? Because your answer to it was interesting, right? Because you said that in the end, the protection of the coastal communities is also what relates to protecting the inland communities,
Yeah.
right? And so, I mean, I guess there's no one-size-fits-all answer here, right? But maybe you have a perspective on where you would start.
I'd start by educating a lot better, because what I did another conference in Miami a few weeks ago, and as I was preparing for it, I was looking for some kind of shocking data on like kind of scary things, because I was talking about adaptation, talking about the need for carbon capture, and what I found was scientists, as well as the scientists from University of Miami, say that about 60% of Miami-Dade County will be underwater by 2060. That's crazy.
Wait, by 2060?
By 2060.
And
So
60%, so this is over half of the county.
over half of the county. And
That's
Miami's
still in our
it's not
lifetime.
just Miami. Miami's big. Miami's multiple towns and cities, and it's huge. So it's scary, and it's pretty far reaching as well. So I don't think, someone that's coming down here getting on a 30-year loan, they don't want to pay off their mortgage a year or two before, if they make it to the 2060 mark, before their property goes underwater. So I think educating people on it will help. Again, education to me will help bring more adaptation or adoption of technologies. Will get people more around, like, okay, well, maybe we need a tax that's going to help pay for rising roads. Like, there was another thing that I've experienced firsthand was when I had an office in South Beach years ago. I was on Alton Avenue. You guys familiar with South Beach at all?
Familiar with South Beach, but not necessarily as much about.
Ocean Drive runs like around the
Right, yeah,
the
of course.
ocean.
Yep.
Alton is like closer to the intracoastal, because Miami Beach there is a little island.
Right,
So
of
this runs on like the other side, opposite where Ocean Drive runs. So I had an office right there, 9th and Alton, which was next to the Whole Foods, which is now there now. And when it would rain for more than 10 minutes, which isn't a long time, the road would start to flood. When there was king tide, the water would come out of the sewers, flood. Like when it would rain and it was a full moon, like people would kayak down the street. And this is a street you drive on, not a kayaking street. So I think it was the state that mandated that they raise the road and then start putting pumps in. They raised the road 4 feet. It was a long project, a very expensive project. And that was great. It helped mitigate that problem. What wasn't great was that it flooded out all the houses around the street, because they didn't take into consideration, raise the road, the water goes somewhere else, right? So I think there's a big need for people being educated. Misinformation, I think, is hopefully more so over. I say hopefully because Florida had taken the word climate out of government documents, because apparently climate doesn't exist, climate change. So education on, hey, we live here, we're ground zero for these climate catastrophes and the worst part of climate change, and it's happening, and it's very clear it's happening. There's just no question about it. So how do we get everyone to kind of rally around, all right, let's do whatever we can, whether it's changing our habits, our carbon habits, whether it's using products like CoolCrete pavers and helping mitigate urban heat island effect, it's using carbon capturing concrete, it's using any different types of solutions. Those all will play towards helping hopefully alleviate the sea level rise. The problem we have here is, like I said, when it was king tide, the water came out of the sewers. You can't just build a seawall and it's going to stop the problem. The water is coming from the ground.
Right.
And we're based on coral rock. It's like Swiss cheese, holding that water back. So this isn't like New Orleans, where you can build viaducts. We do that here, and the water's still going to come up. We have to find a way to mitigate that problem. FEMA's pushing the elevation of homes up higher, so we're building our homes higher. But what about the ones that don't have higher homes and buildings that are going to be underwater? Like, it's a little scary.
The Netherlands has like a drought mitigation, or sorry, it's a drought mitigation system, I think, but it's also a water management system. Generally, that's based off of, I mean, Florida has marshland, right?
As the Everglades, yeah.
And so like that's obviously, needs to be protected. Otherwise, everything's going to be underwater.
Yep.
I guess like, are there any in your travels for your business, have you experienced any examples of foreign involvement and different, types of climate change solutions that you think could be applicable to supporting the future of this area?
I think there's some interesting solutions that are out there. I've heard of some kind of third hand that I haven't dug into, but I think the answer is we need to work as one to find the best solutions and deploy the best solutions globally, because I've heard of some that were happening in Asia that are dealing with similar problems. Like, we need to compare notes. Like, there's no reason that we should, let anyone go underwater and let anyone have to, become victim to climate change or climate catastrophes or sea level rise. So I do believe that we can come up with solutions. Like, the rate of innovation is unprecedented right now, and the rate of adoption of these innovations is also unprecedented. But the problem we're running into, and other companies are running into, is the rate of standards and regulations is not keeping up. And those are holding things back. Like, you can capture carbon here in the US, but if you want to inject it down a class 6 well, which is what you need to inject liquid CO2 so it mineralizes into basalt or other wells that could be orphaned oil wells or something else like that, where the CO2 will mineralize and permanently be stored, there's a problem getting permits. There's a problem finding class 6 wells. So it's like, hey, even if we have the solutions, we can't store the carbon. We can't do something with the carbon. So there's a game of catch up that we have to play too. So it's a lot of fast moving parts.
So in that context, if you were to reimagine the industry in terms of the regulatory and policy on a city, national, or global level, what's like one policy you would like to see, blanketed over everything?
I would say it would be carbon accountability, because, you go to the grocery store, and I talk about this before. It's like, all of us have the ability to make an impact. Like, all of us are consumers, and as a consumer, every decision we make has a carbon impact. And if you go to the store, and let's take Miami. So I go to the store and I look at avocados and mangoes. I could buy avocados and mangoes. Most of them are from Thailand, your mangoes, and then from Mexico, your avocados. Well, guess what? Mangoes grow like crazy here, and so do avocados. Why can't I buy something without a big carbon footprint that's already here? And it's not necessarily, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but you have to take in consideration, like, all right, what is the impact of this? And maybe it's 1 penny cheaper, but it's from somewhere that's thousands of miles away that had to go on this very dirty, over ocean and a big carrier. And so just thinking about, like, how do we be more conscious? So having, some form or some way to indicate the carbon footprint associated with products or with services, so people could be more educated about that, I think it would open a lot of eyes. If you're like, hey, look, this mango has carbon footprint of a car driving 10,000 miles versus this mango, which has the carbon footprint of a mile of a car driven. It's like, well, that's kind of pretty extreme, and you're saving a penny to, destroy the planet. So people just aren't as aware of these things. So certainly that carbon accountability in any aspect, in any way, certainly for businesses and for products.
It seems like the carbon accountability concept relates actually a bit to your like B2B sales cycle that you were talking about before, right? And that, you're selling into these concrete suppliers, right? They're using your products as materials within their materials and formulation. And they're being told by someone that says that they want to be more sustainable, right? I think a question that I had in my head that I didn't get out before was, who is that last level buyer? But we don't need to get into that now. I presume it's real estate developers, it's, governments,
tech companies,
tech companies.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty clear who that end game buyer is. However, in the same context, the people, right? The individuals could also be the ones to make that same decision, right? And the way that like retail purchasing power works now, right, is that it's done in a way where retail buyers are trying to find one size fits all solutions for everyone, especially at the largest scale, right? Costco, big box type retailers, in addition to grocery stores, right? That's one type where they're only going to have one price for each mango, right? However, in like this world of an abundance of choice, right, that we have right now, as you go on Amazon or you try to buy one thing, right? I could try to buy this bracelet, right? I didn't buy this bracelet on Amazon. On Amazon, it was a really weird story. Actually, Leon and I were in Savannah, Georgia. We drove down here, and these two girls that were exchange students came up to our car and said, "Can you support our journey?"
Nice.
That's how I got this. So that wasn't related at all. But if I did want to buy a beads bracelet on Amazon, I look it up, and there would be different types of the same exact bracelet, actually, from different buyers coming from different places, and their prices work in their supply chain, right?
Yeah.
And perhaps some of them have Prime, some of them aren't Prime. You make your decision that way, right? There's no reason why the retail landscape couldn't be the same thing, right? And so I'm really interested actually in this concept. I think it's actually a pretty cool retail concept for people to maybe have the choice to say, hey, maybe there can be a grocery store that has a couple different kinds of mangoes. And one of them might be 10 cents more. I know myself and my girlfriend, we would very easily, I mean, maybe we're blessed to be in a position where we can do this, but choose to buy the one that's 10 cents more. And I think a lot of people would too. Yeah. And that could also even provide an incentive, right, for government subsidies on certain types of products, right? And generally also the importance of like supporting American-made farmers and things like that, right?
Yep.
This is all downstream. I think that's a really, really cool idea. I actually would probably bet on that becoming a reality. Yeah. And I hope that somebody takes that idea and does it.
I'm 100% with you. Yeah, I think that I think it's just the awareness itself. Like you said, like you would pay the 10 cents more, but if you just saw 10 cents more on a product and you had no idea where it came from, you're like, well, why would I pay 10 cents more? Give us a reason, and when we have that reason, we can make an impact. And if you multiply that times million or billions of people, like that's going to have a huge positive impact.
Yeah, and we live in a world of information abundance, right? Like there's no reason why it's like that difficult to be able to showcase like, oh, this is an American pear, like there's no reason why it shouldn't have to be that way. I think that also like aligns, like I said before too, with the concept of people wanting to buy more locally important things. That also relates to health and wellness too. This is way off topic from CoolCrete, but I think it does relate to the sustainability journey though. And I think people would actually always generally be surprised at how similar B2B buying journeys are to B2C buying journeys. And I think that that's something that we talk about a lot on this podcast, and I think is relevant in your journey specifically.
And in terms of your personal philosophical ideals, what keeps you optimistic about humanity's ability to reverse or tackle climate change? Because humans we're not sure if humans are equipped to solve this problem, or are we finding our own instincts in terms of with greed, for example, constantly using. What keeps you optimistic in this fight?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a bit of both, optimism and pessimism, because greed seems to be running it, and it's like I don't understand the logic on why someone, especially someone that has kids, would be like, hey, let's destroy the planet for profit, and then maybe my kid's not going to live a full life. Like, why would you even fathom doing something like that? But not to be judgmental. My typical way is being more optimistic, to say, okay, well, I'm very optimistic today that in a legacy industry like the cement and concrete industry, which has been doing the same thing for 100 years, is now finally dramatically making a shift to be more sustainable. And it was like this. It was literally like overnight. And granted, there was a pause to that, because for a while, companies have been using in Europe fly ash and slag and other things that have been cement replacements to help get it more sustainable. But now there's just such, I think, more of a global push. So I'm also really optimistic because of the sheer amount, the IRA. The IRA, from my perspective, and I travel a lot globally for different conferences and different events. When the IRA came out, as I was in other countries in Europe and in Middle East, I heard like a kind of reiterating our government has to create something like this, or governments were working on creating something like the IRA because they were worried about losing their best and brightest minds to the US because of these incentives. So for me, I saw that as a huge catalyst. I saw the IRA as, a signal globally for people to really push to create sustainable solutions. The incentives were there. The investors were bringing money in. Companies were driving and demanding it. And there was just, finally like a lot of alignment. So I really see, a lot of optimism in our ability to innovate, but also to start adapting, and that the money's there and that the incentives are there, and more incentives and money need to go there. But we are certainly heading in the right direction.
Can you explain what the IRA is for our audience if people are unaware?
Yeah, so it's the Inflation Reduction Act. So it made for a lot of opportunities for incentives, for renewable energy, for solar, for RECs, for carbon, for a lot of things sustainable that would help us with infrastructure, would help us with developments. As a company, carbon limit's really not tied to the IRA. We're talking about IRA also helping for like charging stations for electric cars, and it's really a big promotion tactic, and it's a big incentive tactic. We're not as tied to it because for us, we're more on the voluntary carbon market side. And there's something called the 45Q, which is a tax credit that you can get for removing a ton of CO2, but you have to qualify, and oil and gas companies in some cases can qualify, direct air capture companies can qualify, and hopefully if they edge it out, will be also part of the IRA when they write the new regs. But the IRA is really a huge stimulus for sustainability, for sustainable infrastructure, for redevelopment, and a lot of things in our climate space.
So the IRA definitely had a positive impact there. I guess, if we're thinking about this next administration, something that's been floated as a very random and strange possibility that might actually be a real, we'll see what happens, is the U.S. maybe getting involved with its own public investment fund. This is a stretch, perhaps. Not the U.S. has never done anything like this before, as you said. Right now, the U.S. does not take equity. However, a lot of the Middle Eastern nations do have PIFs.
That's right.
And they do, exorbitantly well, and they spur their economies. Given your experience with the Middle East, and perhaps even experiences maybe with those funds, we don't know if you have. Would you think that could be something that spurs more innovation in the U.S. and maybe has an impact like the IRA did, but to a broader extent?
Yeah, I think 100% it would. I mean, I don't see the other side to that one. I mean, depending on how they plan to do it and what type of companies they plan to give it to, and if it's just well-established companies or certain types of companies. But we've had interactions with the PIF and KSA, and dealing with and understanding how they do things. I think it's really smart. I think there's no reason they shouldn't, because why not incentivize and then make money back? It's like, you get a self-perpetuating system that maybe can even create more than it gives out. And I didn't think that's the whole idea, right? Spur innovation, create these critical technologies. I mean, let's face it, the US wants to be first at creating these critical technologies. They want to have these things. We need to share these things ultimately, but let's race each other to the finish line to create something that's going to help us and benefit environment and all of our people, and then globally benefit as well.
Something that I always like to think about is the concept that the market always wins, right? And that the markets are efficient, and that the markets will create innovation because efficiency rewards innovation.
Yeah.
And so for me, I would think like even in a potentially hostile environment to climate change and sustainability, generally from the public sector, even if that is going to be the case, dollars win. And it exponentially, right? Like dollars win, even if this is not a prioritized issue, right? You see the other companies, the other countries that are having these types of funds prioritize sustainability, and they see it as a building block, not just for expansion of capital, but also for just having leading technologists by their wayside, not leaving technologists by the wayside. I think that that's something that's going to be really, really important. I appreciate the perspective on that. I guess we'll all just have to wait and see, though.
In terms of a more hypothetical or maybe possibility, if every single construction site were to use CaptureCrete or CoolCrete, where do you see this world going in 10 years or 20 years? How would that affect?
We, as a technology, as CaptureCrete or CoolCrete, we're replacing cement. So we're creating a big reduction in carbon. And let's just make it easy numbers and we're saying that concrete's responsible for 10%. It's not. It's responsible for less, but let's say it's responsible for 10%, and we got into all of the concrete globally, and we're reducing about 30% of the carbon footprint at the point of manufacturing, and then we're also capturing CO2 to capture and to actually lower the carbon footprint even further. You're talking about 3% of global emissions being reduced overnight, and then more when it's carbon's being captured. And these are like, you're talking about our roads, bridges, and buildings being turned into active carbon sinks. So you're absorbing CO2 like the ocean is, and it's permanently storing it in there.
Yeah.
I think, we could really solve a lot of our problems really quickly with that, because we're emitting 36 to 50 billion tons of CO2 emissions every year. And if you can even minimize 1 or a few percent of that, like, you're kicking a huge chunk of carbon out of the air and minimizing and helping put us in the right direction. I mean, right now we're trending up on emissions. We're not trending down, unfortunately. And that's maybe to do with AI, maybe to do with developing third world countries, and, a lot of different factors. So I would see it as, finding a sustainable solution that's going to help communities, even more so underdeserving communities and communities that are in, poor areas and poor regions. So I think it would be very beneficial.
Could blockchain have an impact on your work at all?
Yeah, I think from the carbon credit side, I think it could create more visibility and then more trustworthiness, because you're talking about something that could be on to an unchangeable, system that would say, okay, well, here's all the documentation to show and all the test results to show that this ton of CO2 was captured here at this point, at this time, with this amount of carbon, and here is all the data. I think it would just create more transparency. And in this industry that's not fully transparent, in all respects, that would be a big value proposition. That would help bring more buyers in. That would help spur the market even more. So that would, I think, overall just accelerate.
And finally, final question: what's one unexpected lesson that you've encountered throughout your journey that brought along with you?
I think it's, generally when we started with Carbon Limit and we had our initial technology, we even were engaged in a big potential sale, which created over $1 million in revenue for the technology that we were looking to formalize and to commercialize, being open to pivoting. So, and I think that's something, especially for innovative technologies, and we're not just recreating a system or a process or a solution that already exists. Being involved in an innovative technology company or a climate tech company, always being open and aware of pivoting, because that's where most of the great stuff comes from. Like, I tell people when they ask me about being an entrepreneur, I was like, look, just start today. Like, no, nothing's ever going to be perfect. And even if it is perfect, you're going to pivot, it's going to change, you're going to learn things. Like, you just need to start right away and just not be so rigid. And that was actually one thing that we learned. I think the lesson was probably also compounded by, during our Techstars program, they said, don't write a rigid business plan. Write an executive overview, write kind of like an open but flexible business plan, because if you're super rigid, the likelihood of you making a pivot and changing courses when you're starting to crash and burn is going to be less likely. You may end up, crashing and burning and just failing, versus making the necessary pivots and learning the lessons on your failures to get to where you're supposed to be. So I think that's probably the one that can be relevant for everybody.
And if we're thinking about general advice for people that are, about to start something in, let's say, especially in the world of, what used to be clean tech and is now climate tech, what's some general advice you would have?
So again, start now, but also find what you're really passionate about and something that can fulfill you, because it's going to help you get over those obstacles and really build the best team you can. It's really challenging. We talked about before, like, self-taught scientist and getting to the point. My background wasn't in cement or concrete, so finding the folks that have expertise in cement and concrete and building a really strong team, which gave me even more credibility and validity to raise capital, to gain confidence with our customers. So it's really starting now, find what you're passionate about, fulfilled by, and then building a really great team. And, the really cool thing about being in our space, that's, I think why I love it so much too, is that, we're doing something that's bigger than ourselves. We're doing something that's helping the environment, that's helping our generation, our current generation, future generations, and all things in between. And then we're also being paid to do it. Like,
Right.
it's great. Like not everyone that's in our business is there just for a paycheck, just wait until Friday comes around 5 o'clock so they can kick off. It's like most people are there because they want to support their families. They want to, create a legacy. They want to do something that's important. And we're even seeing it, which is unique. And it's more, your generation that's coming out of college now, that's not just looking for the biggest paycheck, but they're looking for fulfillment too.
Right.
And they're looking for something that they can feel good about doing. They don't want to just work for the next company that's destroying the planet, even though they're getting paid the most. They're looking to work for a company that's not just doing some greenwashing and some, surface level sustainability stuff, but that's truly looking to help society. Call them society plus businesses.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Tim.
Likewise.
To close out, do you have any shout outs?
Or anything you'd like to plug? Where can people find you?
Yeah. So, I really am always eternally grateful for the people on my team, the people in my company that have, followed the vision, the mission, and are helping make this positive impact together. So I want to, always put a big shout out to my team at Carbon Limit. You can definitely check us out on, I don't really get on social media. LinkedIn is as social
LinkedIn.
as I get.
Yeah,
Well, that's
yeah.
kind of social media. Yeah, so I'm on there, but you can find Carbon Limit on there. And I think we have some other social channels as well. And then we just launched our new website just the beginning of November. And that's at carbonlimit.com. Come check us out. Take a look at us.
Fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great site. And Tim, don't sleep on LinkedIn. If you want to
I'm
be
on LinkedIn. I just that's the only piece.
especially
that I'm on.
with the very nuanced topics we discussed today.
Yeah.
I mean, like there's actually no other space than that, and there's there's kind of like it's like a multifaceted effect of like being on LinkedIn, right? Because on LinkedIn you get notified when somebody that's in your network did something, even just liking a comment, right?
Yeah.
So there's a really nice flywheel effect, and
True.
after this conversation, like I'm someone that wants to see your ideas amplified, certainly.
Right on.
And so like we appreciate you taking the time with us, but outside of the studio, we're going to publish this episode. We're going to do as much as we can, but it's going to last for a long time, well beyond us. We hope CoolCrete creates the next Roman Empire of concrete.
Yes.
And we
Thank
want
you.
those ideas to be showcased because ideas have legs and ideas also have influence, right? And so all that to say, don't sleep on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
It's real.
no,
It's real.
I appreciate it. Look, and we're always looking for anyone that's out there too that wants to collaborate with us in some way. Like when we started, we were always looking for great collaborations. So we welcome collaborations. Reach out to us at contact@carbonlimit.com. If you want to do pilot projects with us, you want to use the technology, you want to work together. Like we're always looking for collaborations where it's mutually beneficial, including the environment. So always open for that. And really good to hear with you guys and continue on.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Tim. I learned a lot from you, and I can't wait to apply this to my day-to-day.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.